Hello, and welcome to the podcast of the Euramerican National Assembly. I am Mr. R, I guess the host, and with me today I have Ed, Don, and Mr. Black. Does anyone want to say hi real quick?
What's up? Hello.
Ed here.
So today our topic is going to be something that I think is something that's commonly struggled with. We're going to talk about basically how to be an activist that cares about, something that's very deeply important to us, and also that's wildly different than most people than the things that most people care about, and how to be able to still relate to people, how to be an activist and also someone that can interact with and relate to normal people. Because if we lose that ability to still be a normal person in society, then we lose our ability to reach out to people. So there's a difficulty here because I think a lot of us, or what I've noticed, is that as the world gets kind of crazier, the deviation between our beliefs and other people's beliefs grows wider and wider. And it gets harder, I mean, from my experience, it's gotten kind of harder to bridge that gap with people. So it's just kind of a free-flowing discussion today, and that's kind of the problem. And I guess I will turn it over to the group from here, and we'll kind of talk through it.
What I've noticed amongst the younger generation is this greater draw towards things like TikTok, shorter form videos, and a lot of this is what some people would call wigger culture. I'm sure that there's a kinder term for that, but sort of a globo homo insert here identity for white people. And I wouldn't expect someone, if they want to fit in with normal society, I wouldn't expect someone on our side of things to download TikTok and spend 2 hours on TikTok every day so that they can get all of the references, and when they go to interact with somebody, a Gen Z person, to interact with them and know all of the references, the latest meme, whatever. I think this comes down to more your character, how you come off toward people. Like if you meet a stranger, you need to know how to be diplomatic, and being diplomatic is a little bit different with a normal person. You have to be more sensitive around the issues that we typically aren't sensitive with. So I think that would be a productive direction to take it in, instead of, I would never expect someone to watch all of the superhero movies or to have all these apps. It'll just tear you apart.
So I think that's a good point, that what we can't mean just reverting back to, or for some reason intentionally reverting back to caring about stupid stuff, caring about things that don't actually matter to us. So for my generation, it would have been sports, right? We were supposed to really, really, really care about sports and put all of this time and effort into fandom for sports. And then, I mean, you reference like the Marvel movies and all these other garbage entertainment franchises that we're supposed to, Star Wars, we're supposed to fan over these things and put in huge amounts of effort. And so by relating to other people, I think, we can't mean that we just consume all the things that they consume, right? So we have to still be able to relate to people without actually getting all the references. I think that's, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's some balance there where maybe we should get some of the references, but I have found my life is better by not watching and consuming all the things that normal people consume. So if we can't relate to them on that front, I think we have to find other avenues to relate to people through, rather than through the entertainment.
The one thing I found over the years is that our side develops our own language, our own set of values, and people who aren't for want of a better term, our movement or whatever you want to call it, they have no idea what we're talking about most of the time. And I mean, I'll admit, like the first time I started hanging around with racialists and such, I mean, I was there on everything, but there were a few things that's like, what the heck are you guys talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. It sounds crazy. It sounds just so far out there. So I guess the answer is you have to be sensitive to the people you're talking to. What do they know? What are their values? And you have to try to communicate to them in terms that they understand.
Yeah, I find a lot of our younger people that are coming into the movement these days really are putting a lot of basis on language and the use of language, and to get away from a lot of the old antique nationalists, throwing a Roman salute and all the other memes and such that goes with that. And I find that to be a really good thing to do. Language is how you communicate with everyone, not just, within your own little group. So one of the big parts is, talking about trying to separate the activism from normal life. I've always found it to be kind of hard, personally, especially when you care about anything, and especially in today's very hyper-polarized environment. Everything in one way or another has become politicized. So if you have, you end up either in one of two groups: people who agree with you and understand the linguistics you're using and what you're talking about, and a lot of times you'll end up in another group who are completely the opposite of what you even can conceive of as normal. But while you're in those kind of environments, with especially with holidays, that kind of stuff, you really have to kind of pull yourself back, and I find restraining myself a lot.
Well, I mean, one thing that, in my opinion, this is not something that I don't think everyone necessarily agrees with me on this. I think we actually want to avoid language that's too different from the general population, unless it's something that's obvious, right? What the meaning, unless they can readily understand what we're saying with the term that we're using, we can get into a weird echo chamber where we've created our own dialect, and then you have to have like two different modes of communication, in group and out group. And I mean, I don't know, maybe that is an inevitability as we develop our own culture, and the larger culture gets weirder and more degenerate and just unpleasant, over time. Maybe we do have to separate to a certain extent, or we have to allow that linguistic separation, that cultural separation to happen. But I think if that happens too early, it can make us kind of irrelevant, because we're a tiny group of people globally, and if we can't connect with other people, if we're having a harder and harder time with that, then that's going to sort of blunt our effectiveness, is kind of my concern.
If I might add, there's an old saying on the internet, which is touch grass. If you're in an argument with someone and that person is just getting so out there, and they're starting to deny reality in order to get their point across, you would tell them to touch grass, which means go outside and you actually feel something, be in the real world for once. And I think we have a real danger of not touching grass, of living in our own echo chamber, I guess is a good way to describe it in terms of our dialect. But in terms of our experiences, we have to experience things in the real world to some extent, because when you go talk to someone, a normal person, as long as they're not a leftist activist, they still see the real world to some extent. You can connect with them on work, or talk about the weather. I mean, you have to be able to make small talk with people, and you're not going to be able to do that if your nose is constantly in a book and you constantly live in this hyper reality of philosophy. And it's it's not as bad as constantly consuming Marvel movies, but it still has the same effect. We have to be grounded.
So one way that I deal with it is I have what I call rings. So there's people who are very close to me, who think very much like me, and within that ring of people, I can be free and comfortable. Then there's the next level out, which are similar, but not exactly. And so I've developed a set of rules for dealing with them. And then there are people who are not in any circle, who are out in the outer world, and I have to deal with them too, especially at work. So, for me, I've developed the ability to kind of break my thinking into where am I right now, what group am I with, how should I be communicating with them. The other thing is, what are they interested in? Let's find out. Let's have a conversation with what they're interested in, because it's not all just a sales job saying join our side. Sometimes it's interacting and getting to know people. And I mean, I work with some Marxists, and they don't know anything. They don't know anything about my politics, but I know more about them than they know about me, because when I'm at work, I'm professional. That I put on the professional role and I do my work, and what my life is like away from work is nobody's business, and I do my job.
Just to add really quickly, I like your circle visualization. So there would be a series of concentric circles that grow and grow to include a broader group of people. And then there's a middle ground that includes the normies, or whatever you would call them. And then I feel that there's a circle farther off in the distance that includes the Marxists and all these other people. And you might take a normal person along for a ride. You might, clue in on what you believe in, or see if they get some normie conservative talking points or whatever, or in terms of your broader life, in terms of work or your hobbies or whatever else. You might invite them to your home, or invite them to some kind of activity, but at some point you realize that you can lump certain people like the Marxists and the blue-haired feminists into that distant circle, and all you do is be professional with them, and that's it.
Yep.
You talk to them for 5 seconds, and you wash your hands of it.
I think that's a good point, that we have to have something in common with these people. I mean, there are people who the only thing that you could talk to them about is some sort of modern degeneracy. That's their only interests. They're completely gone. So I guess, there certainly are people where it's not worth it to try. There's no common ground at all. But if that, I've talked to some people who have indicated that they think that's the vast majority of the population, 90+%. If that's the case, I think we're kind of screwed. I mean, that's my position, at least, that I think we can actually reach out to a much larger percentage of people. We just have to find the thing that's still there that we actually can interact with. And your point about normie conservative talking points, that's a good start, right? Like, roughly half of people in this country are conservative, quote unquote, and there are some commonalities we have with those people, at least.
And that broader group of people might never believe in the exact same things you do, but it's still worth talking to them and getting to know them, and eventually they might help you out. They might serve a purpose in your life.
And that's exactly how I do it. So for example, I'm a white nationalist, but when I'm at work, I'm not. I'm a Republican, and I mean, to me it's the outer concentric circle, and I interact with most of my friends at work are Republicans, and I know the Republican talking points, and I know what's going on in the world probably better than most of them. And that's what we interact and talk about. That's the thing we have in common. So that's how I personally have worked it out.
The hardest thing I've found interacting with, I guess, what you would call normies, or what could be referred to as vagues. They're vague about pretty much everything in the world, is they constantly want to follow what's now called the current thing. It was the COVID, then it was Ukraine, Now it's, oh, what's Johnny Depp and whatever his ex-wife are up to these days. I don't keep up with the current things, so I really don't know. But that's the hardest thing I find to interact with other people about when they are not, within some of our inner circles on, like you said, political philosophy, that kind of stuff. Those are the kind of things I enjoy. I don't personally watch TV, so I really don't know what the current show is or what the newest Marvel movie is. And generally I don't care because it's degenerate. But that's one of the hardest things I find is to interact with people, because all they want to talk about, or a lot of people, not all people, but a lot of people, all they want to talk about is what the current thing is on Fox News, CNN, or what the newest show is. And I have no interest in any of those personally.
Yeah, and so that's part of the reason, for example, on our Euramerican Telegram channel, I purposely go out to the normal media. I mean, I could pick movement media stuff and just report stories that are from within the quote-unquote movement, the nationalist cause, whatever, and it would be in my view, it would be such a narrow view that you would not be able to realize what other people are seeing. And so I try to add commentary from our perspective, but then I'm reaching out to these normal news sources, and I even read leftist sources just because you need to know what they're talking about. So that's one way.
Well, one of the things, so Mr. Black, you sort of brought up that it gets frustrating trying to deal with them, and I've definitely experienced this when, I guess, depending on my mood and depending on what's going on in my life, when someone, I can tell that the only thing they care about is this current thing that is completely irrelevant to our lives. And also when you have this, you have a thing that you care about that is, in our view, is actually important, our people and our future, and they can't care about something real, but they can care about this totally artificial manufactured thing. That's where that frustration, and that's where, like, I've run into where I'm just like, I want to shake that person, especially, and it's worse when they're close. It's worse when they're actually more on our side, when they're somewhat conservative or whatever, and yet they still have gotten sucked into this, because then you're just like, the frustration, is what makes you a little crazy. So I agree totally on that front, that is the thing that will get you. And I think, when I step back and I say, okay, this person doesn't know, doesn't understand, and we need to go slower, we need to be patient, don't push, too hard on something, that's when I'm fine. And it's also a lot better when we get together with people that do know and do care about things that matter, and then that can kind of ease that frustration. I think if you're only ever interacting with normies, if you're one of these people that lives on the internet and knows all of these sort of movement things from just the internet, but never talks to another person in real life that understands the same things, I could see that being incredibly frustrating. But yeah, it has helped me to kind of reset to get back together with our group.
To add briefly, one of the things that you could do with that person who's just barely on the edge, where you just want to bring them over, gosh, it's so frustrating. You could sit them down and just say, hey, listen, I think that I think that this, watching people in capes throw each other around in this, in this fake pre-planned fight, quote unquote, or the Marvel shows, or whatever else, whatever thing they watch, maybe it's football. You just say, I think it's destructive, and I think that the people who have created this media, they hate you. Would you agree? Do you see that? The problem is that person might react really negatively to that. I feel like, obviously it's not as drastic, but you would see the same behavior in someone who's an alcoholic, or they do cocaine on the weekends or whatever, and they start spiraling out of control, and you should just stop. Can't you see this is bad for you? And they just say, no, it's not bad for me. I'm fine.
Yeah, my experience has been, don't try to take away people's things that they like. If they like the Marvel movies, leave it alone. Don't touch it, because otherwise they'll, then you're the person that's trying to take away the thing that makes the misery of their life go away for a brief moment.
Right. But the problem is that eventually it has to go away. So, is it entirely up to them? Do you just wait?
I don't know. I think so far my experience has been you should just wait, because I don't think. I guess what it comes down to, the question is, when you're interacting with someone and you're making progress in terms of having them start to care about the things that we care about, it should be an addition, not a subtraction, because ultimately I think that's going to be better. Could someone be on our side and still deeply care about the Marvel movies? Yes. So if that's possible, then I don't have to take that away from them. I don't have to show them how the people making those films are anti-white. I can just leave it be. So I agree with you on that, that it's... I think you're going to get a negative reaction. I don't think it's going to be productive.
One way I think about it is, I was in the military, in the Navy, and traveled to a lot of different countries around the world. And I recognize that I have a culture and that they have a culture, and that when I interact with, for want of a better term, a foreigner, I try to learn about their culture. It doesn't mean I'm inviting them to become part of mine. It just means, look, you guys, I have a set of rules for dealing with foreigners, and I treat them with respect, and everything goes fine. And historically, that I'll tell you, it has gone fine. I've been to a lot of different countries and interacted with people from a lot of different cultures. In some ways, I would say, just because they're on this continent doesn't mean they're any less foreign than some of those foreign peoples.
Right, or just because they share your genetics, they have a common ancestor 8 generations back, has nothing to do with whether they're a foreigner or not, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of why I try to... There are a lot of pasty-skinned people out there, in let's just say in the North American continent, but I've come to realize that half of them are lost causes, and that I can deal with them friendly and professionally, and I'm not going to invest any time in trying to correct them or whatever, but, I'll get along in life with them. But then when we come back to our own community, we can actually relax and enjoy each other's community, each other's, company, and I won't invite those kind of people to our gatherings.
Right, well, and part of the problem with, if you want to bring along everybody that hasn't declared themselves to be a Marxist, if there's somebody who's further to the left will obviously not want to have children, and they dedicate themselves to consuming media and all those sorts of things. Well, even if you got them on your side, they probably wouldn't have children. They might not even support your children, because they have this antinatalist belief that's burrowed in their head and lived there for 30 years. So what do you do with that, right?
Well, and so don't mistake me thinking or saying that just because there are foreign cultures that they're all beautiful flowers that some of them need to be stomped out of existence as far as I'm concerned. But until that time, I'm going to be nice with them,
Right.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've thought about this in terms of the context, or in terms of ways to contextualize it, a separate culture, a separate country, foreigners, those are good things. For those that were raised religious, especially Christian, Christians have a concept that they refer to, something like being in the world but not of the world, and different denominations, different sects of Christianity in the United States can get very separate in terms of their culture and identity, become really, really different from the general population. And I guess, some of them will try to a certain extent to still be relatable, but a lot of them just give up from what I've seen. And those are the ones that ultimately become insular cults that ultimately shrink over time. So I've seen cults like this. A lot of them are derived from Mennonite sort of Amish, the Anabaptist beliefs. There are a lot of these groups actually, and they become these really tiny insular cults. And I've worked with some of these people, and yeah, I would just remember being like, I can't talk to this person at all about anything because we have no shared experience. So that's one thing that was I was thinking about a little bit is, we actually do want to pull in people that we can, and if there's a way to still relate to them, I think that's something we should do, even though we understand that right now they're a foreigner. The fact that we do share those common ancestors and that common heritage. If they're not a committed Marxist, I think that there is potential to have those people become part of our culture and our identity over time.
I agree, and it's going to take time. I don't think it's going to be an immediate thing. You can work with these people. You can find your commonality. You can find the key differences between yourself, the values that we hold versus the values that they hold, and maybe try to convince them that, what this idea is worth considering. One other thing I think that's important, though, is, if we're going to recruit people, if you want to use that term, we have to be a community that has something that they want, that they look at us and say, wow, that's a community that's got their act together. I want to be part of that. There are always going to be people who are looking for the edgiest, most extreme thing, and I don't believe we should be doing that. I think this is something that a conclusion I came to is we should not be the monsters that our opposition calls us. We should just be regular people living our lives, making our community better, building up and developing it, and eventually it's going to be something that somebody says, hey, that's cool, I want to be part of that.
Yeah, and, a big part of it is we need to be the heroes in our own story. A lot of what happens is when people come to a white positive environment, the anti-whites have built a picture of what that is. So some of them, they don't know anything other than what the anti-whites have already put out there. So they become that evil monster. And they become the monster in the anti-white story instead of the hero in our story, standing up for our people, being good, being decent, and building community. Nobody wants a person that every time they show up in a conversation just starts throwing word hand grenades every which direction, and getting people's eyes to get as big as saucers of what did he just say? What I think he did? Nobody wants to be around that person, and if you try and be that person, your group is going to be extremely small, possibly all the way down to a group of one, and that's you, because nobody wants to be around you. Everybody wants to be around a hero. They don't want to be around a villain. Go ahead.
I remember when I was I must have been 15 years old, and I was just learning about all of the things that we believe today. About certain historical events and all those different things. And I was very impressionable. But I'd spent all these years in school, learning about how bad it is to be one of these people, one of these evil Nazis. So, I start learning about the truth about these historical events, and I'm thinking, this all seems really true, but I just can't get on board with the whole, evil, the idea that we're told in school and elsewhere that these people are evil. They want to kill. They want to kill innocents. They want to kill civilians, and that's what they did at various points in history. Apparently that's what it means to know the truth about these things. It would have just taken one person who fit the archetype of the evil Nazi to come along when I was on that journey and say, "Oh, you know the things. You know about the historical events, don't you? well, come on, we're gonna go burn down a synagogue or whatever. You know, it would have taken one person like that for me to be like, oh, these people are wrong and they're evil. I'm just gonna go back to being a normal person. You know, it would have taken one person, even if there were thousands of people, you know, that I were exposed to that were good people that believe these ideas. You know, so it's important that we don't become that caricature. That is going to prevent anyone from coming over.
And that to me is pretty important. I mean, I look at, you know, quote unquote revolutionaries, you know, say Thomas Jefferson or Washington, George Washington, or any of those people from the American Revolution. But those were, when you start learning about them and you read their literature and you're going, wow, these are mild people. You know, these are people that did something revolutionary, and they built a tremendous system to get what they wanted. But they were not crazies. You know, I've read a lot of the, you know, the writings of some of these early guys. So for me, that's kind of, I think there's this tendency, like I said earlier, to want to be the edgiest, you know, pushing the limits. But you know, the reality of making change in a society is that it's not always those people that change, that bring about the change. It's common work, you know, being a representative of the ideas that you profess to believe, and for people to see that and say, wow, that's a cool thing.
Right. You know, speaking of the founding fathers, these people were not outcasts. They were not rejects. These were basically the commercial, you know, the most interesting man in the world. That's who these guys were. They would have been on the cover of magazines as, you know, the most stylish people. They were business leaders. They were community leaders. They weren't people that were outcasts throwing, like I said, verbal hand grenades around about how evil, whatever they wanted to call the king. They were very held back in their writing and everything, and they did everything they could legally within the system before revolution ever became even a thought to them.
And they were also some of the most educated people on the American continent. They were brilliant. All of them were very intelligent,
very well read. Yeah, we have, or in the past, in these kind of circles, we've had, not to say rednecks and hillbillies are bad, but, you know, people of very little education who just want to throw around edgy words and LARP, wear costumes basically, and get noticed. But the kind of notice that they were getting is not what we want for the future, unless we want to go extinct.
I mean, and if you listen to our opposition talk about our history and our people, you know, just pick a time slice and you look at the people that they're talking about and going, these are people going about their normal daily lives. They just refuse to accept the leftist claim that we can't have a society based upon our heritage, you know, our you know, whatever term you want to use. And for me, that's it. Just one simple idea. Okay, I'm going to stand for, this is the basis of my community, is my heritage. My community is based upon people of a certain heritage, and good is that which serves that community.
Well, in terms of, you know, talking about pulling in the outcasts and the kind of, you know, odd people, you know, that's not what we want to do. We want to pull in the normal people, the people that want to make, the working people that want to make a better life and want to make the type of people that originally built this country. That's who we want within our community, because that is our heritage. And again, a thing, just thinking back to religious groups, you know, especially weird religious Christian denominations, which I will not name any of them right now, but there are some that are well known for picking up weird outcasts and people. You know, you kind of will run into these groups, and the more extreme they are, the weirder their population is. And I remember one of these, you know, it was like almost exclusively divorcees who, you know, were financially destitute, was like what this religious group ended up being made up of. And the reason is because their beliefs were bizarre, and the only people that get pulled into that are the people that have nothing else. And so you don't want to be that group that only has draw for people that are totally broken.
Well, and I've interacted with some people who I think have good intentions, but are ultimately they conform to the edgy, I'm going to throw around words and phrases that everybody doesn't like. And the conclusion that I've come to is, if you can't, this would be a person on our side who agrees with a lot of our beliefs. If you can't get me to go along with something that you're saying, how could you ever get anyone else to go along with it? Most people aren't as open to new ideas as the four of us sitting here right now. Even on our side of the spectrum, right? So people start talking about we should go and kill all these people. We should force them to do X, Y, and Z. They have this grand idea of revolution means violently killing a bunch of people, and you just say, I'm not going to go along with that, and nobody else is. You're going to be one person, just like you were saying, Mr. Black. Is at some point you're just going to become one person, standing out alone, throwing around verbal hand grenades, and we don't need that kind of person.
But we're not, and that's the thing, is we are. I mean, it's hard to know what percentage of white people believe the things that we believe, and I think the number is quite high. But our opposition, I mean, everybody does a cost-benefit analysis in determining what they're going to say publicly, what they're going to present to the public. And most people say the cost is too high to talk about that or defend that, and therefore they don't do it. Doesn't mean that they don't accept it, but they can't talk about it. And pretty soon a whole environment of nobody wants to talk about it, and nobody does or can talk about it. At some point, and I guess that's what Euramerican National Assembly is. It's a group of people who just say, no, this is important to us. Our heritage, our nation, our people is important to us, and we're going to move it forward. We're not going to be the extremists that, not because necessarily extremism doesn't have its values at times, but we got to live our own lives. We got to pay bills, get jobs, and interact with all sorts of people that don't understand our ideas.
Well, I think that, one thing you said there is, we're not allowing our enemies to dictate our beliefs and our presentation. I think that that's important, and I think that one thing that's kind of come up in this conversation is that there are people that have internalized this to such a degree that they have become, in my opinion, I think they've become largely irrelevant because they're unable to interact with normal people in a healthy way because they've internalized so much of these beliefs that they can't interact anymore. So, I think that so what we're trying to do, is create a culture and a movement that helps to guide people that get into this, so that there's an obvious thing. You join this group, and these are the set of beliefs that kind of goes along with that group, and they're not something that would make most people run screaming, right? I think that is a good start, while not compromising, not saying, well, most people don't like that we say that white people have a right to exist, so therefore we're gonna pull back on that. No, we're gonna stick with that even if it's unpopular, but we're not going to pick up some other belief just because we're being told that that's what the really hardcore true believers of our movement believe. We're going to define it ourselves rather than letting ourselves get pushed around in our ideology.
And I think our opposition wants that. They want us to be extreme. They want us to become some small outcast group because now they control the discussion in the general populace. And by refusing to be cornered that way, by saying, I'm going to openly say, this I hold true to this idea in front of everybody else, then suddenly other people can see, oh, look, somebody believes in that too.
Right. The anti-whites have basically defined anyone who loves Europeans, wants to maintain our culture and our genetics, that you don't just love your people, you hate everyone else. But yet, if an Asian did that or a black guy does it, BLM, those kind of things, oh, they just love their people. You know, we're the one group that they've predefined that, oh, it means you hate everyone else and want to eradicate them. It's like, no, I want my people to exist. I want your people to exist also, but I don't think we need to do it in the same space. You know, that's my own belief, because you can only have cultures within a culture. This multicultural stuff doesn't work, from my view. But
right, the false dichotomy is there for a reason. The false dichotomy of you either have to be for genociding all of the minorities, or you have to hate yourself because of your race.
right,
You
you
know?
have to be for white erasure and
Yeah.
the removal of your own people.
I don't want to be on either side of that. Neither of those are good things.
I mean, when I first started thinking about this kind of stuff, I purposely, so first of all, you know, I've lived in Canada, for example, and I've seen the Canadian, the French Canadian, the British Canadian, and other cultures. And so when I started talking about, well, I mean, for me, it started in high school, actually. When I was in high school, I said, how come they can have a black students union and we can't have a white students union? Being white is no different than being French or English for me. And of course, you know, that's racism, you know, shut up. But as things moved on, I actually started playing an experiment publicly in this public discussion. I would start talking about white issues from a purely cultural perspective. And what I found, and I would purposely avoid using the word race, for example. And the left would always immediately, oh, you're talking about race, and therefore this is about race. And I said, no, I'm not talking about race. I'm talking about culture. Oh, then you're a racist. No, what I'm talking about is something about culture and heritage and history. It's to their advantage. They've got a whole program of mind control by using that word race for people. And most people are, first of all, are ill educated on how to talk about it anyways. So when a leftist who's got their talking points all figured out, you know, is presented to them, the leftists they just work out their program, and many people think that they're trying to engage in discussion with these people, and these people aren't about discussion. They're about squashing you and eliminating your culture and your identity. So I guess it follows back from, you know, define yourself. You know, don't let someone else, because somebody else is going to try to tell you who you are, what you mean, and what you should be doing. And for the most part, I think white people, we should say, no, I'm for this. I'm for A, B, and C, and that's what I'm all about. And I know that you're going to try to push me in a direction that I don't want to go, but I'm just going to stand firm. You know, we are a people. We have a right to exist. We have a right to self-determination, to select our own future and where we're going as a people. And there's nothing extreme in that. In fact, I've brought it up before. These are leftist talking points. Leftists talk about, you know, human rights and things. Well, the things I just talked about are listed in Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So they seem to apply to everybody but us. And so I'm not going to be extreme. I mean, I have at times, but I think I've got a real point here. And every time a leftist reacts the way that they do, they make my point for me usually.
Well, I think that's actually a pretty good summary of, in terms of our beliefs and the way that we don't want our movement to become, or our involvement in our movement to become, dictated by others and directed into this dead-end path. That doesn't necessarily, I mean, I guess that prevents us from, it defends against us being prevented from ever relating to normal people, because if you do develop these sort of out there beliefs, or presentations of beliefs even, you're basically neutralized. You will never relate to normal people from then on. But beyond that, I guess, so as long as we don't have those as long as we don't have that problem happen, I still think that there's work to be done in order to still just relate to normal people, to find, I think what we talked about earlier in terms of like finding things to relate to them on. There's got to be still some piece something that they care about that isn't anti-white, that isn't a problem, that's something that we can still embrace. I think one thing I've been thinking of here is just that in terms of, being able to relate to normal people, we do want to, while this is important, this is, the most important thing is, in my view, is this movement, is our goals, basically creating a future for our people, I would say is the most important thing. But, we can still have other interests. And those interests, I think, do allow us a path, an in to talk to other people and to have that connection that can ultimately bring people in. So, I don't know, I guess we've talked about a number of things in the past in terms of different types of interests and activities, but maybe we can kind of talk about that real quick. What are the sort of things that are still good things to do that allow us to connect with people?
I think that children might be a good example. So if you're talking to somebody who has children, that already makes it more likely that they're not a Marxist, that they're not some horrible lefty, and that you'll have something in common with them politically and ideologically. And then children, it's hard not to care about your own children, especially if you're not a leftist. So with some luck, you'll be talking to someone about something passionate that you would probably know a lot about, even if you don't have children. And that could also split off into a political avenue of, have you heard about what they're teaching at the schools and whatever else? Or you could just keep it completely on the side of, how do you, how do you manage your home? What chores do you have your kids do? What do you get them involved with, sports or whatever else? And then if you have kids, you could invite them to activities that your child is doing. I think that it should be something like children, because that's not a surface level thing. If it's a reasonable person, then that'll probably be the most meaningful thing in their life, or one of the most meaningful things. So I'm sure there's other examples, but that's probably what we're going for, is something that you could talk to them casually about, but they'll certainly be interested in the conversation.
And additionally, kind of going along, what do we have in common? Well, we have a heritage in common. We have history. We have culture in common. So I would say express your culture. Don't let culture be something that somebody else did. Find out how you can express your culture in front of other people. Play music, read poetry, read history, find interesting historical articles, and bring that out. And that will for people who hold our values, those things are important to them too. I mean, especially, I talk with the people who live who have heritage in the South, for example, and you talk about things that are the historical experiences their people have had. They immediately they want to talk about that stuff. So, and maybe I don't have the same heritage, but the fact that I'm interested and I want to hear, and I really do want to hear it, they want to talk about it. So pretty soon history and culture and things like that become very important, and you become friends based on that.
I think that's a really good point. That, one thing that we've talked about a number of times is that we do have this culture and this heritage, and we care about it, but there's a lot of people that say they care about it and don't participate in it almost at all. And especially a lot of the people, the previous generation of nationalists, there were a lot of them that didn't seem to know anything about our culture and our history, besides a few critical historical events that were mistaught, shall we say. but there's so much more to us than that. And so I think that, we're trying to preserve our culture. We're trying to preserve our people. Well, the claim that leftists make that white people don't have a culture, it's kind of true in some ways for the people that have given up on embracing and having a culture. And so I guess one way that we're, just fighting back against this whole thing is to embrace our culture and our identity and our heritage in that way.
And the way you can do that is just learn a historical song, for example. Learn the words, sing it out loud. I mean, let other people experience it as well. I mean, that bringing forth history, culture, and bringing it relevant to today. That's one way, and that's why I like your music so much, Don. But there's other ways, and there's a lot of different aspects. Our society, our civilization, if you want to, has been the most advanced, and there's so many different aspects of culture, literature. There's whole literary lines, music. Yes, there's different regional musics. But often a lot of commonalities across them. Clothing, dress, history. As I pointed out to one person, that especially for British people of British heritage, for example, we got a lot in common with Germans, because guess what? The kings and queens of England and Britain are now Germans, So there's a lot of things that that when you start looking back in your history and your culture, you go, oh wow, this is cool. We should be talking about this. And other people like doing that, I've found anyways, talking about that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, I think one thing that's been surprisingly easy to talk to people about is genealogy. A lot of people are into it, and for Euramerican, I've met so many people where I've been able to identify a common ancestor, like random people I've just for whatever reason strike up a conversation with, and you can figure out where our common ancestor is, and that's, people get excited about that and interested, and even people that have no pro-white identity whatsoever still like to know about how they came to be and where they came from. And I think that's a good intro one, too, to a certain extent.
And that's why I'm going to throw out a recommendation here. Check out archive.org and just type in history or something. They'll come back with hundreds of books that are maybe 50 or more years old that, our ancestors were reading and that are relevant to today, I think. There's a lot of historical things. There's poetry, there's music, there's picture art, graphical arts and such that are, people, it's kind of an old trope today to think about, something like the Mona Lisa painting, but it's something, our ancestors looked at and felt a commonality to, and now we can do that too.
Well, I think that's actually pretty good in terms of just talking about how we can connect with people. I think the summary there would be embrace our heritage and our culture, and how do you connect with a normal person? Well, find things that they care about, and maybe that's not the main thing that they spend their time on, because maybe they spend a lot of time on films made by people that hate us and pop culture that is driven by anti-whites. But there's other things. They don't just have that. They probably have other things, and just be as well rounded as you can in terms of your interests that are positive in terms of our heritage. Putting some time into embracing your culture, that's not a waste. That's the whole point of what we're doing, is that we will have a heritage and a culture to pass on. If we somehow win a battle in terms of control for our countries, but we completely lose our past and the things that made it significant that we're different, then what was the point, right? We want to maintain that as much as possible. So embrace that, use that as much as we can. I think it's still going to be a struggle, because that frustration we've talked about when people just don't get it. But I think that it is definitely doable, and it has to be done. We have to maintain relatability with other people. Otherwise, we're a dead-end group, and that is something I've seen happen repeatedly, and that's just not a. Obviously, we don't want to go down that road because we know where it leads.
Yeah, I agree, and I've talked with leftists in the past. They'd ask, what do you want to do? Cut yourself off from the rest of the world? And it's like, no, we got to learn. I mean, because it'd be nice if we're the only inventors of significant technologies, but we're not. We can't allow some foreign people to invent a technology that's going to make them more powerful and influence and control our lives. So we got to be engaged with what's going on in the world, identify what's important and what's significant, master it ourselves, and apply it for the good of our own people.
Well, I think we've been, it's about an hour, and I guess it's probably a pretty good point to sign off for today. Is there any other kind of closing thoughts that anyone wants to get in? Okay, well, I guess I'll go ahead and just say thanks everyone for listening. I think that I definitely sort of progressed in my thinking on this topic through this conversation. So hope it was helpful to you as well, and we'll be back next month. So I guess does everyone want to sign off? This is Mr. R, and I'll leave it to everyone else.
Mr. Black, and I'm out of here.
Mr. Ed, signing out.
Peace.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.